أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, so today we continue with our study of all the short surahs of the Quran, and we're going to be looking at the Surah al-Masad, also known as Surah al-Lahab. Just to give you the historical context behind the surah, we traced earlier the history of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that he was the progeny of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who lived some 2,600 years before the time or the advent of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a lot of while this page has got a genealogy table spanning perhaps about 2 centuries, if you look from the bottom going up to what you can see on the screen. So the solid lines mean there was a direct link, right? And what you can't see are dotted lines right on the top between from Ismail and going down to the Fihr Quraysh. So there's about 20 odd generations there. Suffice to say that all the other 25 prophets mentioned in the Quran, from the 25, 24 of them had not, besides Ibrahim alayhi salam, of course, did not go to Makkah, and there was no preaching or teaching happening there except for in the advent of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was born there, raised there, and that was the community he preached and taught to. So if we look at just in a brief overview of Islamic history, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born in 570, died in 632. So he lived for 63 years, the last 23 years of which were in the time of his prophecy and after the revelation was received. And he lived 13 years in Makkah and the last 10 years in Medina. And then after his death, the Khulafa Rashidin take over as the Khalif in charge of the Muslim world at the time. They ruled from the city of Medina. There were a total of 4 Khalifs that ruled for about 20 years, and you know their names. And this was more or less the period of their years that they were in power as the Khalif. And known as a Khulafa Rashidin means the rightly guided Khalifs. And you can see they come from various tribes of the Quraysh, not just one tribe where the father nominated a son, etc. So they came from different, and there was a different way of nominating the next Khalif when the time came. So after the Khulafa Rashidin, we then move on to the Umayyads periods, which lasted almost 90 years after the death of Hazrat Ali. The first Khalif was Muawiyah, and then he started something different for the first time, which is he gave the Khilafat over to his son Yazid. So he in effect started the system of hereditary succession, meaning where the father appointed the son, that son in turn appointed his son, and that son appointed his son. So that's the way it was 14 caliphs from the same family of one of the families of Hazrat Uthman, as it were, and that's where they get the word from Umayyah. You get the word Umayyads. So they ruled from a city called Damascus in Sham, in Syria, in the north. So they moved the capital from Medina to Damascus, and there were 14 caliphs that ruled, of which the famous ones was perhaps Muawiyah, who started this Umayyad dynasty, and his son, who was a bit on the notorious side, because during his period, the famous Battle of Karbala on 10th of Muharram was fought, where he actually killed Hazrat Hussein and 72 of the companions and the Sahaba and the Ahl al-Bayt of the time in that famous Battle of Karbala in Iraq. And the other famous person is Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who was known as the fifth of the Khulafa Rashidin, simply because he was absolutely frugal, pious, and very good person. And during his reign, a very short period, Islam triumphed and it became once again like the period of the Khulafa Rashidin for a short period. Suffice to say that 80, 90 years went by, then the next group that came into power with the Abbasids, and they ruled for over 500 years. They shifted the capital from Damascus to Baghdad in Iraq, and they had a line of 37 caliphs going from that line of Abbasid. So this Abbasid block here goes into another genealogy table of 37 caliphs, one being the father, next the son, the son, the son, going down the line. Famous of whom were Harun al-Rashid, al-Amin, and Mamun, which was the glorious period of the Abbasid rule in Baghdad, where famous scholars and inventions and creativity, and there was just a burgeoning and explosion of knowledge and inventions during this time of the Harun al-Rashid to Mamun, and a little later in Baghdad as being the intellectual capital of the known world at the time. What happened in parallel to the Abbasids ruling Baghdad was one family member of the Umayyads managed to flee from Baghdad because Abbasids were actually killing off the remaining members of the Umayyads. And one member actually managed to go right across North Africa from Egypt across to Morocco, and then he crossed over the Straits of Gibraltar and entered Spain. And that's where we get the rules of the Umayyads in Spain, a parallel empire from Granada and Cordoba as a capital, and that's how this became the center of Islamic learning in Europe, on European soil for the first time. And that dynasty also ruled for about 300 years in parallel to the Abbasids ruling on this side for about 500 years. So these were the two great empires of the day. But that is just for bigger history background, just for your information. Now we move on to this bottom part of this genealogy table, which is more important for our lesson today. So if you look at Abdul Muttalib was the grandfather of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His father was Abdullah, and Abdullah was one of a few sons and daughters of this particular big family. So if you look at it, Abdullah was the father, and he died even before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was looked after by his mother after he was born, and for 6 years she looked after him, and Amina was the name. And when she passed away, the custodianship or the guardianship of the Prophet, who was an orphan, moved over to another uncle, Abu Talib. Now, I've used different sort of like rectangles and circles here to show you. Now, let's start on the extreme right. Hamza was a very, very strong Muslim. He converted in the early years, and we know in Islamic history, in the Battle of Uhud, he was the one that was martyred, and Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, actually was so cruel that she cut his stomach open and actually bit and chewed on kidney and liver and all the rest of it of Hamza, just to show her enmity towards Islam and to Hamza in particular. So Hamza was a great stalwart of Islam, and he died and is one of the shaheeds of the Battle of Uhud. Then we look on the other side, Abu Talib. He was what is known as a friendly kafir. He never converted, but at least he showed a lot of respect for the Prophet. And in that sense, he was like a very good person to rely on and trust. So Abu Talib was never converted to Islam, but nevertheless was a pillar of support for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the young orphan in growing up. And unfortunately, Abu Talib also dies in the boycott years, those last 3 years before the Hijrah. Then we look at Abu Lahab, who was the other uncle of the Prophet. Now, I've put him in red because he was a vehement and staunch enemy of Islam. So the relationship between this uncle and the nephew was very, very strained. And we're going to look at that just now a bit more in detail. But I'm just giving you the background of how they fit in terms of a family tree. So the enemies of the Prophet and Islam were quite a few. Abu Lahab and his wife stand out, and that is why the surah was also revealed. Abu Jahl also stands out because Abu Jahl actually was a very wise man and a very good person actually, but he was one of the two. You know, when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a dua that please let either Umar ibn al-Khattab or Amr ibn Hisham, which is Abu Jahl, convert, that will strengthen Islam. it so happened that Umar was the one chosen to accept Islam and became the second Caliph of Islam as well. And he was a very good Muslim. And Abu Jahl remained on the other side where he just never converted and all his wisdom came to zero. So Abu Jahl was another staunch enemy of Islam. Then we have Utbah ibn Rabi'a, also another enemy, and Walid ibn Mughira, who we mentioned earlier. He was a poet and he was so fascinated with the Quran when it was being recited. And he was kind of convinced that this was the word of something supernatural, something greater than what he ever heard in amongst the poets of Arabia, and they were famous poets at the time, and he himself was a poet. So he was very impressed with the Quran, but never got around to accepting Islam. In fact, Abu Jahl put him under pressure by saying, you know what, although you're convinced that the Quran is a miraculous sort of creation of Allah and a gift of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but don't accept it and don't come out openly about the fact that it's such a great book. Rather talk and toe the line of us as the Quraysh saying that we have nothing to do with the Quran, we'll never accept it. So, unfortunately, Walid ibn Mughira, with all his intelligence and his poetic capabilities, he never accepted Islam. Then we mentioned Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, and how she killed, or rather, what she did to Hamza, the dead corpse of Hamza. And there were many others. And then if you look at going back into Musa's time, we know of the famous Pharaoh or King Ramesses II, or the great King Ramesses, as he was known. But Pharaoh was the title of this particular king, and he had in his court two famous people, Haman, who was the minister in the court of Pharaoh, who led the military, you know, instructions of what Pharaoh wanted done, killing all the male offspring at the time in fear of the birth of Prophet Musa. And Qarun was a very, very wealthy individual. Now, these three words are mentioned in the Quran, the Pharaoh, Haman, and Qarun. And if you look at it, this is a summary of essentially like people who had either power or might or military backing or even extreme wealth to such an extent they were like swimming in wealth. But Allah dealt with all three in the time of Musa alayhi salam. And the message for us in the Quran is that even in this day and age, in today's times, you have many, many people who are kings, who are so-called amirs, or in charge of domains, or kingdoms, or emirates, or whatever the case is. And if their power goes into their head, then Allah brings about a change one way or the other. So whether you're the greatest leader or the most influential leader, or you got the most powerful army backing you, or the fact that you've got oil wealth or any other kind of wealth that makes you very, very rich and makes you get pride and become haughty, Allah will deal with you in His own way and in His own time. Then we have Abraha, the other famous one we did in Ashabul Fil, Alam Tara, where he wasn't mentioned by name, but he was mentioned with the elephants that he came. So he was part of the companions of the elephant that came to destroy the Kaaba, and Allah dealt with him in a very decisive manner. So if you look at all these enemies, in the time of the Prophet, from all of them, the only one that's mentioned by name is Abu Lahab and his wife. Right? Now, not that Allah is dignifying them by mentioning their name, He's actually showing what they were and what their outcome at the end is going to be like. So he's painted a very bleak picture of these two people. As far as Abu Jahl go, we'll study a bit about him and his attitude towards Islam in another surah we're going to be studying, Lam Yakun Alladhi. And then Walid ibn Mughira also was mentioned in another surah in the 28th para where he was asked to talk about the Quran and he kind of paced this way and that way in his house and no one knew, but Allah mentioned those few verses where Walid ibn Mughira was given this opportunity to come out forcefully in favor of Islam, but rather chose to do the opposite. So these were people that were notorious for their disbelief and for the way they treated the Prophet. Then we look at the Sahabas who suffered at the hands of Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl, Ammar ibn Yasir and his family, because they were all martyred. Bilal, we know this famous slave from Abyssinia and what he went through, and Abdullah ibn Masud. And then there were many others who also suffered at the hands of these two, Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab in particular. So let's move on to the surah itself. Al-Masad, the one name of the surah comes from this last word, masad, which means palm fiber, and twisted fiber, in other words, made into a rope. Right? So these were 5 verses or 5 ayat. And why it's given this name is because this is going to be the end result of the wife of Abu Lahab. Because if you look at what the surah is talking about, is perish the two hands of Abu Lahab, and may his life and all his whatever he's done in life come to nothing. So his wealth and whatever he's earned, nothing will be of benefit on that day. And what's going to be his outcome? He's going to be burning in the blazing fire, right? In a nutshell. So that's the fate of Abu Lahab. Done, sealed. Then they talk of his wife very, very briefly. They say she was the carrier of fire. She will be the carrier of firewood in that afterlife. And on top of it, so she's going to be carrying the fuel that's going to burn Abu Bakr and herself in that same fire of Jahannam. But she's going to be carrying this wood all the time. And then on top of it, she's going to have around her neck a rope of palm fiber, twisted palm fiber that's going to choke her and kill her. Is going to like make her suffer the pangs of pain as well as burn with her husband. Right now, why this necklace of this neck of? Because they say in her life she took great pride in wearing an ostentatious necklace. So she was like the part of the aristocracy. She was the sister of Abu Sufyan, a great leader of the Quraysh. So let's just talk briefly about both of them, the Abu Lahab as well as the wife. Right? Abu Lahab, his name at the time of birth given to him was Abdul Uzza. Now we know Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, the famous, gods and idols that the polytheists of the day worshipped. So he was the son of, or so-called the servant of the idol called Uzza. But what happened is, in his early life, they changed his name to Abu Lahab, and Lahab at the time meant something that's fiery red, because he had a very good reddish complexion, especially his cheeks. So he had that complexion where you could see him as a very handsome man with red cheeks and, tall, standing out amongst everybody else. And also in terms of the power that he held, he was the treasurer for Quraysh. So the sort of the Baitul Mal of the day, he controlled it. In other words, he controlled the purse strings of the Quraysh tribe. So he was a man of like power and might and kind of an important person and one of the dignitaries of Quraysh. But the same Abu Lahab, which is the father of the red cheeks or the father of the red complexion, in this surah, the name is changed to this, a fire. He will burn in a fire of something blazing. So it's blazing red. So his cheeks that were known to be good, sort of adjective, now changed to a negative attribute, and that is going to be, burning in that fire, which is going to be very red hot. Right? So that's his fate. Then his wife was another great person in the ranks of the Quraysh. Her name was Urwa, or she was known as Jamil, because she was like known to be the mother of being a very beautiful woman. So her nickname, Jamil, showed that she was also part of this Quraysh sort of upper bureaucracy and the aristocracy of the day. And she was of noble blood with sister of Abu Sufyan. And the two of them were like the sort of couple of the day, like people looked up to both husband and wife to being like ideal Quraysh citizens or Quraysh family members. And they had many children, of whom two are famous, Utbah and Utayba were the two sons of theirs. And prior to Islam, Utbah and Utayba were married to the Prophet's two daughters, Ruqayya and Kulthum. And once the message came of Islam, when the first revelation came, Khadija converted, then her daughters, whoever, they also all converted. And Utbah and Utayba were like forced by Abu Lahab not to convert, and they themselves also staunch like enemies of Islam. And Utayba on one occasion, so they divorced, and he was such an enemy that on one day he even spat on the Prophet, to which the Prophet's response was he made a dua that Utayba must be killed by an animal. And lo and behold, even though he was under heavy protection, he was killed by a lion, as historians say. So he was killed by way of a dua of what the Prophet did as retribution for having spat on the Prophet. Utbah, he later converted and became a Muslim in the Fatih Makkah, in other words, in the last year before the Prophet died. Right now, why were these two people also very obnoxious? Is they used these different words to describe the Prophet. They called him on some occasion a sahir, a magician, meaning that he had such a powerful book that he was like casting a spell on people, and through the spell of the words, they converted, and they shouldn't have done so. So they claimed he was a sahir, he had magical powers about him. Then they even claimed that the Prophet was Majnun, he was mad. I mean, all these years, we and the Quraysh progeny, like we believed in these idols, Allah, Al-Uzza, and many other idols. So why does he want to come and change the status quo? So he's a madman. Let's ignore him and not have dealings with him. Then they even went forward to say that he's a shair, he's a poet, because some of these lines, and I didn't point this out, but if you look at just this surah, if you look at the rhyme scheme here, you say وَتَبَّ وَمَا كَسَبَ ذات اللهب والحطب and Masad. There's a kind of a rhyme scheme that you can see in the surah, and in many surahs you find this rhyme scheme. If you look at just the last words, and even when somebody reads it like a Qari, you can pick up these rhyme schemes very easily. So definitely the Quran had poetry in it, and it flawed the best of the poets of the Arabia at the time. Also from in Athena, we know that last word al-Abtar, they used to use this word that he was the one cut off, meaning that because his son Abdullah died in infancy and he had no other male progeny, that the whole lineage of Prophet Muhammad will be cut off. So they used to make this comment, Abu Lahab in particular, he's Abtar, he's got no future because he's only got daughters. He can't have sons like we have. So they said it out of pride, but that in Athena was revealed and cut them down to size. Then on one occasion, he even threw a rock at the Prophet with the intention of killing him, but it didn't happen. And as far as stones go, his wife had this opportunity sometimes to throw stones. They were living next to each other. Abu Lahab's house and the Prophet's house were next to each other. So over the little boundary wall, they used to throw dirt over the fence and throw dirt sometimes at his doorway, so that when he opens his door, there's dirt right in front, the entrails of camels thrown onto him. So they were really like avowed enemies of Islam and enemies of the Prophet, right? And Jamil, as Urwa, his wife, was also a poet of sorts. He actually composed poetry, great rhymes against the Prophet. So all these things put together, these were, while they were a celebrity couple, respected by the Quraysh, but in terms of the Quran and Islam, we regard them as the lowest of the low. And Allah revealed this surah to show what their fate will be. Other names of the surah is Surah Abu Lahab, or Surah Fibre, or Surah the Perish. Perish is the word Tabba, or the flame, which is Lahab, or the palm fiber rope, which is Masad. Okay, let's look at the actual surah itself. Now, this word Tabba means to perish, and it's like a curse that somebody would make or give to another person. So if you look at this word Tabba appears twice. It's Tabba ya and Tabba ya again, right? Now, how it came about that this word was used was one occasion when the Prophet was preaching to the Quraysh leaders, and Abu Lahab happens to be one of them. He was also invited. Abu Lahab just couldn't bear to listen to the Prophet teaching anything. So he started being very raucous and being loud and speaking on the top of his voice so that the Prophet's voice could be, muffled. So the Prophet ﷺ couldn't give the message on that occasion. Then on another occasion, the Prophet called the leaders of Quraysh, and Abu Lahab was one of them again, to a little meeting, and he tried to preach to them all. And then Abu Lahab, after listening to the message on that occasion, he asked the Prophet, "What's in it for me if I convert to Islam?" So the Prophet ﷺ responded, he said, "You'll be like us, somebody who's subservient to the message of Islam, and you'll be equal to all of us." So Abu Lahab couldn't bear to listen to that kind of a thing, that you're making me as such a great guy to become equal like one of your ordinary Sahabis. I mean, that's just impossible. I'm not agreeing to that. So on that occasion, Abu Lahab used the word tabban lak, in other words, that phrase, perish, because you, O Prophet, you come with a message which none of us will agree to, and may you perish. So he cursed the Prophet using the word tabban. Then on another occasion, once when the Prophet was standing on Mount Safa, calling all the people around the of Quraysh to say, what, if I tell you there's an army behind this hill about to attack you, will you believe me? They all said yes. Then he started preaching the message of Islam. And on this one again, Abu Lahab happened to be there, and he said, you know what? Uh, like if I accept Islam, what's going to be, So the Prophet said, well, there's going to be a day of judgment and accounting and all that. So again, on this occasion, he used this phrase, tabban lak, to your deen, tabban to your deen. In other words, may your religion you're preaching perish, and may you also perish. So this one, so if you look at, that's a background to the word tabba, right? It's a saying perish. Now, when this surah was revealed, this tabba is now sent back to Abu Lahab in another way. Allah says, tabbat yada. Now, tabbat, why the ta comes in here is because it's a feminine, and it's made feminine because yadun is a part of a body, and any part of a body that occurs in pairs, like here, we've got two hands in a human body. So therefore, the verb becomes feminine because of the fact it's referring to the two hands of Abu Lahab. Right? So what Allah is saying is, may the hands of Abu Lahab perish, tabbat, and tabba, let him, he himself also let him also perish. Now, this is a very, very strong sort of curse to give to anybody in the Arabic language. When you say tabban lak or tabbat yada, or may you perish or may he perish, what you're saying essentially is that may your life and all your earnings and your body disintegrate. In other words, may you have such a disease that is incurable, that your skin actually disintegrates to such an extent that you end up having a horrible death, and to such an extent that when you die also, no one will want to touch your body and your corpse. And that's exactly what happened to Abu Lahab at the Battle of Badr. He didn't go himself. He got one of his other cronies to go and fight on his behalf. But just immediately after the Battle of Badr, he died this ignominious death, to such an extent that the family of his didn't want to even touch his body, and they had some Abyssinian slaves to come and dig a hole, and they dropped him into a pit and covered him with stones. So this is exactly what happened to him. His hands not only disintegrated, but his whole life also disintegrated and perished. Right? So that's a very strong curse that Allah made, and it sealed his fate once and for all. Then it goes on, ma aghna anhu. Now, ghani is to be a rich or to benefit. So ma aghna anhu. So although his wealth, mal is wealth, so his wealth did not benefit him at all, and also whatever he's earned. So whether he inherited maybe from his father any wealth, or even all his life's actions that where he accumulated wealth, or the fact that he was even the treasurer of Quraysh, whatever he did in that sort of, with that cap on his head, all his actions came to no benefit and came to nothing. Right? So it's diluted to the absolute bottom core, where you lived in this world, but what you earned and what you worked hard for and what you strive for, everything has come to zero in your life. What's going to be your outcome? Sayasla. Now, there's two particles for the future in Arabic. There's a sir, which is the immediate future, and another word called sofa, which is also used, you can say sofa, yasla, naran, rata. Sofa is like the far away future, and sir is the immediate future. So what's going to happen to him is in the very near future, he is going to yasla. The word salah, there's two roots. The one is salah, as we know, salah, to perform salah, but this is another verb with the salah ya, and so yasla means he will burn in a naran, in a fire, which is that lahab, which has got blaze in it. It's very, very fiery. Right, then it goes on. So his case is sealed and done and dusted in the first three ayahs. Then they talk of his wife, Wamratu. Now there's two words used for the wife. One is Zawja, which is a close, good companion to have, and Imra'a is like a distant, a woman. It's like saying, and his woman. Right? Not even calling him, he's like his wife, because she doesn't deserve that dignity because she was also an arch enemy of Islam. Now, who was she? When she was in her life, she was like part of the aristocracy of Arabia. She had slaves to go out in the forests and collect firewood so that they could burn that firewood and cook and that in their house. Now, somebody who carries something, hamala is to carry, is the verb, right? From here you get hamala, you get hamala is to carry. Hamil is a person who carries things like a porter. Right? And like in the airport, you get a porter pushing your luggage for you. That would become a hamil. Now, a hamal or a hamala, hamal is the male of the version of it, and a hamala is a female version of it, is somebody who carries things. Now, in this case, she is made into what is called a carrier of hatab, of the firewood, of the firewood. So from being an aristocrat and having slaves to do this work, in the next life, she herself is going to become a slave, carrying wood, and wood for what purpose? So that this fire that's burning in the previous ayah, so Yasla for her husband, is going to be enraged even more because there's more fuel of firewood being added to this fire that's already burning. So she and her husband are going to burn in the same fire, and she's going to be made into this slave, like carrier of add more fire, wood, add more fire, adding more firewood to it. So it's a continuous action. Now, hamal or hamala is like if you look at khubz is bread, khabaz is a baker, khabaz is the person who bakes bread all the time, like daily. It's his job. So that's how you get in. Wahab is an attribute of Allah, who is the one who is very magnanimous and he gives all the time, and he gives goodness and benefit. So Wahab, Hammal, Khabaz, that's how you get this, the scale of this word. So Hamala is the carrier of the wood that's going to be burning him and her in Jahannam. And on top of it, what's going to happen is Jeed is a neck. So on her neck is her. Fi around her neck is going to be a thread, a fiber, like a rope of palm fiber. Now, if you look at palm fiber, is one of the strongest things that you can make like string or rope out of. Now, she's going to have a necklace of uh, palm fiber, which is very strong and is very, very cutting, sharp-edged, to such an extent that if you put that over your neck, you'll have bruises all over your neck, and your neck will bleed, just because this habal, this rope of muscle of palm fiber is so strong and tough and hard and rigid and pokey that you're gonna be like choked with this thing, right, around your neck. So while you had a ostentatious necklace that you used to show off with in this life, but in the next life you're going to get something far worse, which is a hubble of masad around your neck. And we in South Africa, we know we've used the word necklace, when people, take kangaroo courts and put, tires around people and burn them, putting fuel. It's that sort of image that's in this ayah, that's around her neck is going to be this, not only something that's throttling her and killing her, but also while it's in the fire, it's actually catching a light and is burning her. So all in all, she's going to have a very, very terrible end. And this is the way the surah ends. So it's quite a strong story about these two celebrity people of the Quraysh and what their end is going to be. May Allah protect us from becoming them and let us use the power and the wealth we have in good ways, and let us never undermine or denigrate the truth wherever we find it, because if we do in any way, this could also be our fate if we go against the true message and the message of Islam. Stop at this point. Let's end with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq, wa tawasaw bis sabr.